Hello, I'm David Brown. I'm the chair of the International Neural Network Society College of Fellows and head of the INNS History Project. Today, I'm interviewing Professor Mitsuo Kawato. Professor Kawato received a Bachelor of Science degree in physics from Tokyo University in 1976 and an ME and Ph.D. degrees in biophysical engineering from Osaka University in 1978 and 1981, respectively. From 1981 to 1988, he was a faculty member and lecturer at Osaka University. From 1988, he was a senior researcher and then a supervisor in the ATR Auditory and Visual Perception Research Laboratories. Since 2003, he has been director of ATR Computational Neuroscience Laboratories, and in 2004, became an ATR Fellow. In 2010, he became director of ATR Brain Information Communication Research Laboratories. He is now concurrently working as a specially appointed visiting professor of Toyama Prefectural University and a visiting professor at Kanazawa Institute of Technology and Graduate School of Informatics of Kyoto University and Tamagawa University Brain Science Institute, and a special advisor for the Center for Advanced Integrated Intelligence Research Institute of Physical and Chemical Research, RIKEN. For the past 40 years, Professor Kawato has been working in computational neuroscience and has compiled an outstanding record of achievement with hundreds of oft-cited publications, a multitude of collaborations with distinguished scientists throughout the world, and inviting talks at numerous international conferences. He is a fellow of the INNS and has received many awards, such as the Gabor Award in 2008 from INNS and Japan's Purple Ribbon Medal. Well, I'm very impressed with what you have accomplished, Professor Kawato. To begin, let's start out with how did you get into the field?
So I was an undergraduate student of a Department of Physics in University of Tokyo. And at that time, I wanted to become a researcher in various possible fields like nuclear fusion or biophysics of various substances like proteins and DNA, as well as brain science. And I really have a lot of thinking which way I should proceed. Then I found out that it's interesting to investigate the brain, which wonders about my future by some physical methodology like computational modeling, theoretical modeling, combined with experimental studies. So that's the reason why I selected neuroscience as my major target. And then I searched various laboratories in Japan at that time in 1978, which is the most ideal research environment for me. And I found out that the Department of Biophysical Engineering in Osaka University incorporates 3 different kinds of labs. One is neuroscience, neurophysiology lab, working on cats, mainly cats. And then mathematical engineering lab, as well as biophysics lab. So I decided to get into this Department of Biophysical Engineering. And then I got deeper and deeper into computational study of the brain. So that's how I started my research career. Then I got a PhD in 1981, I believe. And then I became a faculty member of the same department of biophysical engineering, Osaka University. At that time, I was an assistant professor of neurophysiological lab of Nakaakira Tsukahara, who was a great neuroscientist. Unfortunately, he died because of the tragic accident of JAL 007 in Osaka in 1985. But I really enjoyed to work with real neurophysiologists working on CAT, and Nakaakira Tsukahara was one of the first researchers who demonstrated synaptic sprouting, a special type of synaptic plasticity in the cat brain. And then I became a lecturer of mathematical engineering lab with Professor Ryoji Suzuki. So in a sense, in my own brain, I combine neurophysiology and mathematical engineering. So that's the start of my career. And I was more and more interested in computational neuroscience, and I developed several models of the brain, especially internal models of the cerebellum and internal models in the visual cortices are my most, successful early days modeling. Nowadays, people use terminology internal models so frequently, and the number of publications exponentially exploded in the past 20 years. So I'm very proud that I was one of the earliest researchers in 1980s to develop this idea. Then I was invited to my current institute, ATR, Advanced Telecommunication Research Institute, in 1988. And because we have a lot of degrees of freedom of research in ATR and huge amount of money compared to universities, I moved to ATR. And my relationship.
Excuse me,
Yeah.
where is ATL?
ATR is located in Kyoto Prefecture. It's about 30 minutes train ride from middle of Kyoto City. It's south border of Kyoto Prefecture, and it's actually maybe closer to Nara City. So we are nicely located between Kyoto City and Nara City, two centers of Japanese sightseeing places.
Yes.
So before COVID-19, we had a lot of Chinese travelers around this area. Nowadays, we don't see them. We miss a little bit. And then in 1993, Professor Shunichi Amari asked me to take the co-editor-in-chief position of neural networks. So that was the beginning of my, deeper relationship with INNS, 1993. And I worked for the co-editor-in-chief for, I think, something like 14 years until 2007, I believe. And then Kenji Doya, my previous colleague, took that position. And during INS negotiation, especially I am very proud that we had a conversation with a publisher at that time, Pergamon, to have the arrangement of how they ship neural networks journals to the member of JNNS, Japanese Neural Network Society, and we have the kind of contracts about money as well as steady support to editorial office in Japan. And at that time, I worked with Stefan Grossberg and John Taylor. So they were co-editor-in-chief for representing American part and the European part of the neural networks one. So that's a very brief, history, how I started computational neuroscience and neural networks modeling, and how I was involved in neural networks as well as International Neural Networks Society.
Well, that's certainly interesting. What do you believe are your most significant accomplishments?
I believe internal models. So internal models are neural networks which somehow simulate or emulate some dynamic processes, including physical processes outside the brain. And I think that notion of internal models were originally in theoretical control engineering, but I proposed in 1987 that within the cerebellum, we have two types of internal models, forward models and inverse models. So in order to control very complicated controlled objects like human bodies, animal bodies, or robots, you cannot depend only on feedback control, which does not use any sophisticated simulator or emulator of the controlled object. So a forward model is a model which has the same input and output direction. That is, forward model receives an FLS copy of the motor command and predicts the sensory consequences of the movement. So this is useful for internal feedback control or for optimal control and so on and so on. But the inverse dynamics model has the opposite input and output direction. So it can receive a desired trajectory and can compute necessary feed-forward motor command. And we Japanese were very much influenced by Professor Masao Ito, who died 3 years ago. And he was great in various experimental study of the cerebellum. For example, he demonstrated that the Purkinje cells are inhibitory neurons. He found a synaptic plasticity between parallel fibers and Purkinje cell called long-term depletion. But he was also a great guy in theoretical neuroscience. And he proposed a model of vestibulo-ocular reflex. And although he didn't use a word internal model, but his model was essentially an inverse dynamics model of eyeball trained by retinal strip, which is conveyed by climbing fibers. So I was very much influenced by Masao Ito's work, and then theoretically formulated that in the internal models of the cerebellum. And this was also developed into vision domain called forward and inverse optics model of vision. So I think I've been doing many things, including brain-machine interface or decoded neurofeedback, or recently more on neuropsychiatry, where I can develop brain-based biomarkers for various mental disorders, including major depression, schizophrenia, and so on, or therapy. But I think from theoretical points of view, internal models are my largest contribution to neural networks and to computational neuroscience field.
What are your current interests?
So I am interested in why AI or deep neural networks needs huge amount of data while humans and animals can learn so fast. So I think the largest mystery related to internal models is why humans and animals can learn internal models of really complicated objects like our human bodies, or our bodies interacting with a very complicated grasped object within, say, 200 trials or 300 trials. As you well know, for deep neural networks with hundreds of thousands of modifiable synapses, need hundreds of thousands of training sets, like images or speech data, or Go game data, and so on. So from a theoretical point of view, it is well known that the same amount of training data are necessary as a number of modifiable synapses. But this is ridiculous because in our brain, we have 10 to the 14th modifier synapses. And if we need 10 to the 14th training data, longevity, life expectancy of humans are not enough to collect training data. So I'm interested in how brains can learn so quickly from a small number of training data and can generalize very well. I think we have many factors like synchronization of filings or modular architecture, hierarchical architecture, and so on and so on. But recently, I'm most interested in how metacognition or consciousness can help brains to learn from a very small number of samples. And we name this neural network, which is again based on internal forward models and inverse models, as cognitive reality monitoring networks. We have just pre-published this, and I got quite excited about this.
Oh, that sounds extremely interesting. Just changing gears a little bit here.
Mm-hmm.
What about the early days of the International Neural Network Society? What were things like then?
That was a really exciting time for me. So I think I attended the first ICNN meeting, International Conference on Neural Networks, in San Diego, 1984. That was midst of the move, kind of hype of neural networks, and everybody got quite excited about the success of much layer perceptron, backpropagation, and recurrent neural networks, Hopfield model, Cohonen's self-organizing map, and Amari Sensei's neural network fields, and Fukushima's neocognitron, and so on and so on. And people was so optimistic about the future of neural networks. So we believe that it will change the engineering field of computation entirely. And also we'll have easy understanding of the brain within quite short time, like 10 years, 20 years. So everybody was quite optimistic, and many people got into the field, and the hype, of course, went down in the mid of 1990. But with the current boom of AI, artificial intelligence, I believe that the most of the sources of idea were already there. Like convolutional neural network, convolution part is from neocognitron, and backpropagation was already there in 1984. And so I was pleased by this very optimistic atmosphere of the International Neural Network Society in the first 5 years. I enjoyed that, but at the same time, I got a little bit skeptical that everybody got excited, and they thought that they can solve very difficult neuroscience problems within a very short time. That was too optimistic. And also regarding the engineering application of neural networks, because of many factors, including the shortage of training data set and the slowness of the computation, really at that time neural networks didn't have a real impact on the industry. But very good memory, because at that time I was quite young.
You still appear very young.
It was 30 years ago, and I was in the 30s, so good memory.
Yes.
Yeah.
How about in the present day? you have views about the role of a professional society? What the
Yeah, I think, most of the people who are working in AI these days forgot about the relationship of the current AI and neuroscience or neural networks. But we should, educate people that all the current success of deep neural networks, convolutional neural networks, have the history of neural modeling in 70s, 80s, and 60s, even 60s. Because, as I said earlier, in order to somehow provide more gigantic leap to the current AI, we should learn from the brain more and more. Actually, the current AI is really limited. We should not utilize the name of artificial intelligence in its original definition, because we do not fully understand the brain intelligence. And if we do not understand them, how you can make artificial intelligence? What we can, achieve is just, arithmetic computation, logical reasoning, and some inference utilizing huge amount of data. But these are tiny parts of the brain intelligence. So we really need to understand how metacognition or consciousness, or different kinds of working memory and different kinds of memory system can contribute to future AI. So I think INNS can contribute to position the current AI in a broader context of neural networks modeling and computational neuroscience and biology.
I think you've started to talk about a topic of great interest to me, and that is what is your opinion about what people are doing right and doing wrong with artificial intelligence?
So I think industrial impact of AI is fine. It can be used in many different ways for vision, translation, text, or even games, where you can obtain huge amount of training data quite economically. But if we are reminded of the miserable results of DARPA robotics challenge 2015, only 6 years ago, that many humanoid robots developed in famous universities, famous institutes all over the world, also from Japan and Korea. And most of the robots could not achieve 8 simple tasks, like walking on sand, or going upstairs, or open the door and entering into the room, or get on a car and get off the car. And even the successful one, they are slower than humans 10 times. And so here, AI doesn't help robots to acquire new skills, because for robots or any kind of control systems, you cannot have hundreds of thousands of training samples. If once robot falls down, you cannot get the training data anymore. So 10 times failure is almost unrealistic for robot training. So the current AI is successful only for a very limited range of problems for which you can take training sample quite easily and quite economically. But most of the problems are not like that. So it's fine that people get enthusiastic about AI industrialization, but AI is really tiny and small for the scope of the applied domains. And I think if we have more resources in somehow bridging between the current AI and neural networks and neuroscience, we are going to have a more, I think, fruitful future of AI.
How about what would your advice be to a new researcher starting out in the field?
Yes, you know, in the field, research field, scientific field, there's always a boom as well as a momentum of the society. So if you ride on that momentum, probably you can easily publish. You could be promoted, but you may not get the real satisfaction. So in order to really productive, young researchers need to be different from the mainstream of the research and development. They need to be different from their friends and neighbors. So please consider yourself deeply who you are and how you are different from other researchers in the field, and what is your, advantages, strong points, and shortcoming and weak points, and probably you can find the most appropriate research direction or research domain where you can express yourself most efficiently. So that's my advice to young researchers. Please to be different from others.
Well, Professor Kawato, I very much thank you for your time and much enjoyed talking with you, just as I've enjoyed listening to quite a number of plenaries given by you at major conferences. So
thank you.
We're very blessed to be able to talk with you now.
Thank you so much for setting
you.
up this opportunity. Yeah,
Thank you very much.